Hello everybody and welcome to a very special Christmas Eve Murder at Bedtime Under the Covers episode of various ghost stories from people I know who have personal experience of the story or forwarded to me that they have heard of or read. Now, if you're like me, I love to just sit here just with the Christmas tree lights on, the flames of the fire, a nice glass of something alcoholic and listen to the ghost stories. So, as you know, this is waffle free, no frills. So I'd be really chuffed if you could join me and see if I can shiver your timbers. And in the words of Debbie Q, see if I've got a doozy of an episode for you. So, with that, let's crack on. The first story tonight was sent to me by my friend Mel in Cape Town, South Africa. It's only a short one. It's called The Puppy in the Basement. My mama told me never to go down into our basement, but I really wanted to know what the noises were down there. It really sounded like a puppy, and I wanted to see that puppy. So I opened the basement door and I tiptoed down a bit. I didn't see a puppy because all of a sudden, Mama yanked me out of the basement. She yelled and yelled and yelled at me. She had never yelled at me before, and I cried. Mama made me promise to never go into that basement again. But then she gave me a cookie, and that made me feel so much better. So I didn't ask her why the boy in the basement was making puppy noises and why he had no hands and feet. The next story is a very interesting true tale from Hannah in Winslow of what occurred to her husband in Sidari, Corfu in 2006. She says, "My husband Rob and I booked a holiday to Corfu. The trip from the airport was not a comfortable one, very hot on the bus, and the terrain was bumpy. Our apartment was located along a very long dirt track. On first glance, the apartments, the pool, bar, and general facilities looked pleasant. It was absolutely boiling by the time we arrived late afternoon. We felt tired and sticky and just wanted to get to the apartment and relax for a bit. We were welcomed with a friendly smile by a young lady in her early 20s. She was very efficient. She led us to our apartment. The walls outside were terracotta and white and surrounded by pretty trees, shrubs, and an array of colourful flowers. The door, though, was painted dark green. The lady opened the door. The room was very basic but clean. The furniture was very dated, as was the decor. But at that moment, we didn't mind. She handed us our key and said if we needed anything, to just ask. We put down our cases and sat down. I noticed that the room was not light and airy, but dark and dull. I looked in the bathroom, which appeared to be very dark and oppressive, and it didn't help that the tiles were brown. Even with a window, it was dark and dingy and smelt musty. After sitting down for a while, we decided to explore the pool and the bar area for some drinks and snacks. But there wasn't much atmosphere, so we headed out to the local area to look for somewhere for our evening meal. After eating, we headed back to our apartment. The apartment felt unwelcoming and made me feel uneasy. I found it difficult to sleep and didn't feel I could settle. One night, Rob awoke and was completely immersed in fear. He felt paralysed and couldn't move at all. There was a very heavy pushing down on his chest, as though a person was sat on him. He was finding it very hard to breathe with the weight on him. He couldn't see anyone in the dark, but he felt a menacing presence. He closed his eyes, feeling totally fearful, and in a few minutes the feeling finally subsided and the presence had gone. To this day, neither of us know what was sharing that apartment room with us, but whatever it was, didn't want us there. Rob didn't share with me what happened to him that night at the time. He hadn't wanted to scare me on holiday. We both said that looking back, the young lady who greeted us on the first day never entered the room, but just hovered by the door. We chatted at length about the heavy atmosphere in the room and how uncomfortable it felt, especially in the bathroom. In hindsight, we should have asked to move rooms, but didn't, and to this day, we still talk about our Corfu experience. Now, the next story is a very short story that I came across just a little while ago. It's the story of a father tucking his son into bed in the evening. The son asks his daddy, "Can you check under the bed for monsters?" "Sure," says his dad, and for his amusement looks under the bed, where he sees him, but it's another him, quivering, staring back at me. He says, "Daddy, there's somebody on my bed." Now, this little story was sent to me by a lovely lady called Louisa from Canada. It didn't happen to her, but it was a story her brother told her that he had been told. When my sister Jane and I were children, we went to live for a while in an old farmhouse. We loved exploring its dusty corners and climbing the trees in the orchard. But our favourite thing was the ghost. We called her Mother because she seemed so kind and nurturing. Some mornings Jane and I would wake up and on our bedside table find a cup on each that hadn't been there the night before. Mother had left them. She was worried that we would be thirsty during the night. She just wanted to take care of us. Among the farmhouse's original furnishings was an antique wooden chair, which we kept against the back wall of the living room. Whenever we were preoccupied watching TV or playing games, Mother would inch the chair all the way towards the centre of the room. We always felt sad moving it back against the wall. Mother just wanted to be near us. Years later, long after we had moved out, I found an old newspaper article about the farmhouse's original occupant. A widow, she had murdered her 2 children by giving them each a poisoned cup of milk before bed. Then she had hanged herself. The article included a photo of the farmhouse's living room with a woman's body hanging from a beam. Beneath her, knocked over, was the old wooden chair placed exactly in the centre of the room. Now, the next story is a favourite story of mine that was put up on a Lincolnshire ghost site. It's about the Homestead pub in Bracebridge Heath, near Lincoln. On the site of the main building of the old St John's Mental Health Hospital, the pub itself is housed in the old main building. In the late 1970s, when it was still a hospital, myself and 2 of my friends would go upon our motorbikes to the Nurses Social Club disco on a Friday night. The hospital was a very spooky place after dark. Anyway, this story takes place many years later, when a man and his wife took their grandson for dinner there. The grandfather takes up the story. We sat in the non-smoking section of the restaurant and were the only customers. My grandson, who was nearly 5, mentioned a man watching him. We asked where this man was, and my grandson pointed to the glass wooden partition approximately 2 metres away. My grandson covered his eyes with his hand and occasionally peeked through his fingers. He was very fidgety and asked if we could move. We did move to the front of the building in the hope that he would look out of the window, but he continued to look behind him and said the man was still there. We ate our meal, but he didn't eat his, and for 20 minutes he asked if we could go. I said I would go over to the man and ask him to leave, but that my grandson would have to tell me where the man was. I walked over and stopped when told to. I extended my arm and moved it around. At this point, it was above my head, extended outwards. My grandson said I was touching the man's feet. A member of staff mentioned that other customers had seen the same thing. As we walked past where my grandson said the man was, he looked upwards. On the way home in the car, he said the man had something like string around his neck, but thicker. The next story is a story from my friend Lynn. In the early 1980s, she worked at the King's Head restaurant in Ivanhoe for several years. She takes up the story. It was an old 17th century coaching inn, and the old stables were still intact in the rear courtyard. I'd always sensed an atmosphere inside the building, and there was a definite presence in a couple of the rooms. Going through one of the bars to the cellar, I sensed and felt, rather than saw, serving wenches wearing long dresses with mob caps and aprons, carrying jugs of ale to serve men at tables. There was a lot of chatter and merriment, even though there was no audible sound in the bar. I could hear the sounds of laughter and the clink of tankards, and feel the general air of people making merry. I could almost feel the swish of the serving wenches' dresses. However, upstairs was a room, number 13, with a really cold, sinister feel to it. It was always cold in there, even in summer, and where I had to go into that room, I felt the need to prop the door open with something heavy, as it gave me the feeling that if I was in that room and the door closed, I'd never come out again. I was always reluctant to go into that room and always scared, particularly if I was alone. I later learnt that during the war, World War II, the King's Head was taken over by soldiers, and they would go on practice missions on Ivanhoe Beacon. On one occasion, the young son of the house was allowed to go along, and during manoeuvres was run over by an armoured vehicle. He was terribly injured and was taken back to the King's Head barely alive, and the doctor came and pronounced him dead. He had died in his bedroom, room 13. Anyway, a nice Christmas ghost story to finish off with. The Mistletoe Bride. In the early 17th century, a young woman named Anne was to be married on Christmas Day at Bramshill House in Hampshire. After the ceremony, as was tradition at the time, the guests were all set to carry the bride to the bedchamber. But Anne suggested a game to be played and asked for a 5-minute head start before the guests came to find her. Everyone searched long and hard for Anne, but no sign of her could be found. At first they thought she was playing a trick on them, but soon a sense of unease fell over the guests. The bridegroom, Lord Lovell, was distraught, and guests began to whisper that she had fled. Days, weeks, months and years went by, Lord Lovell never stopping looking for his bride. Then one day, 50 years after the disappearance, Lord Lovell was up in the huge attic of the sprawling building, where he began tapping on the oak panelling. As he knocked, a long hidden secret door sprung open, and inside he found an ornate wooden chest. He prized open the lid, and there, still in her wedding dress and clutching her mistletoe bouquet, were the skeletal remains of his beloved. The scratches on the inside of the lid attested to her desperate but futile effort to free herself, and she now walks the halls in her wedding dress, free at last. Thank you ever so much for listening tonight. I hope you've enjoyed these few little stories that I've given you, and I hope wherever you are going to have the best Christmas that you possibly can. Have a great time, and I will see you all in the new year. Bye bye.